Hello, it's October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And this month, She Network is hosting a series of conversations with women who have gone through the experience of having breast cancer. And we're talking to these women to share their stories. We're also talking to various health and wellness specialists to discuss and raise awareness of breast cancer. My name is Laura. I'm the founder of She Network, Strength, Happiness, and Empowerment. She Network is a community of women supporting each other to discover and use their strengths as superpowers to unlock happiness, success, and impact in every area of life. Cancer cases have been rising over the years, and the number of people living with cancer is expected to continue to increase. And more than 25% of all cancers diagnosed in women are breast cancers. And so I feel this is why it's so important for us to be aware of what's happening in our bodies. I'm very thankful today to be joined by Parul all the way in the UK. Thanks for joining us. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your story and just from the moments that we've had of conversation, I feel very inspired and encouraged.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You mentioned that you're in the UK and you're a story coach.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I'm based in London, UK, and I work as a coach and I help people find, own, and share their stories.
That's fantastic. I think who better else to hear, to see that in action and to hear your own story coming through. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey and your experience with breast cancer?
Sure. If I make it to the other side of cancer, I would do everything in my power to live the rest of my life, no matter how long it is or short it is, as meaningfully and joyously as possible. Laura, that was the promise I made to myself when I was diagnosed with the most aggressive kind of breast cancer in the week of my 34th birthday, and didn't quite know for about 6 months whether I would really make it to the other side of cancer. And so every single day, I got up and made this promise to myself because you know how it is in the world of cancer. I had the best access to the treatment. I had the best access. I had access to the best healthcare that is available in the world, but I couldn't really assume that things will work out. So I had to go through the process and find out for myself, which meant that I had to live with that uncertainty. And therefore, this promise that I made to myself that if I make it to the other side of cancer, I think it just kept me going. And then, after going through an intense round of chemo and surgery, I did make it to the other side of cancer. And the treatment was still on, but it was, I've made it. The light at the end of the tunnel was in the view. And so at that moment, it was time for me to really consider how I would keep the promise that I had made to myself. And that was the time when I took a long, hard look at my life. So, Laura, I'm somebody who has had a very normal life. I had been doing normal things that normal people do. Things like going to school, college, university, joining the corporate world, working hard for promotion ratings, bonuses, traveling the world, spending time with family. Normal life, as I would say, and a good life. And I loved that life. And then cancer happened, and boom, my life changed. So when I came out on the other side of cancer, I had changed as a person. And now suddenly I wanted different things from life. And so in my post cancer life, the question was, how do I keep that promise to myself? The whole thing about living and as joyously and meaningfully as possible. And so one of the things that I decided was to come off the autopilot mode that I had been living in. It was a good life. My pre-cancer life was a good life. I loved it, but it was pretty much on an autopilot. And one of the big decisions I took was I would start living consciously. because I had a greater appreciation for life now. And as a result of this initial decision, I said, I'm going to step away from the corporate world and the job that I loved. And I want to focus only on work that's going to bring me joy and meaning, because work is an important part of our lives.
Yeah,
And that's where,
absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
we
we
spend so
spend,
much time
exactly,
at
we
work.
spend so much
So
time working.
So
And so I,
I'm just thinking about how I think just as you're sharing, just how dramatic the change was in almost in like the before and the after of your life, and it seems like I'm not too sure. I'm sure you've done some research in terms of like some of the statistics, but 34 seems pretty young to get
yes.
that kind of diagnosis. And so I'm wondering, what was that like for you? Like, what was your maybe your healthcare regime? Like, was that something that you were conscious and aware of and intentional about at that age? So, what was that like for you, and how did you come to get this diagnosis?
So how did I get diagnosed? I would say I was lucky in the sense that cancer showed up in my body. And so my cancer journey started with me finding a lump in my left breast. And and so I gave it a couple of weeks just to make sure that it was definitely there. And when it didn't disappear in a week or two, because it was possible that it could just be the regular hormonal changes that happened during the cycle. When it didn't disappear, I went to my doctor and I reported it. And I said, look, I found a lump and I want to know what it is. If it is nothing, if it is benign, then that's what I want to hear, really. But if it is not, then I want to get on with it as soon as possible. And my doctor shared my concern, and he sent me to a specialist. Within 2 weeks, I was at the hospital and I saw this fabulous guy, this doctor who went on to become my breast surgeon. And just by physical examination, he was able to sense that there was something sinister lurking. So I had just gone in for a physical examination, but he asked me to stay back, and I went through the entire battery of tests that day. The first one was a mammogram, followed by an ultrasound, followed by a biopsy. And before I had left the hospital, they had given me a heads up for cancer, even without the results of biopsy, because they would come in a week's time. So that's how my journey started. And I say I'm lucky I found that lump, because a lot of times cancer doesn't show up until later. And I got diagnosed at a stage where they could still help me. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's also like it seems like you had quite a healthy awareness of your body as well, and like you said, I think being able to detect it at an early stage makes a huge difference. Just that idea of early detection, and then you mentioned that your advice would be don't Google. What was that? What happened for you?
So when I went for my initial appointment with my specialist, you could imagine the shock. I was this practical person. I decided that I would take the 9 o'clock appointment at the hospital, finish it by 9:15, maximum half 9, and be back at work by half 10, because the hospital wasn't very far from where I worked. And that didn't happen, because I had that initial appointment and then a mammogram, then the ultrasound and biopsy. And so half a day was spent there. And they actually said to me, because of how everything panned out, they actually said to me, because I wanted to know, I kept on saying, say something, tell me something, because I could see something was wrong. I could understand it from their verbal as well as non-verbal language. And they gave me a heads up and they said, next week when you come for biopsy results, please expect to find cancer. And so I had gone in as somebody who had found a lump, but I came out as a potential cancer patient in half a day's time. And so I wanted to understand more about what cancer meant. Until then, my knowledge of cancer was really from the books and watching TV, and the normal level of knowledge that people have. I would call myself an aware person, but that awareness is nothing like without having, it's nothing compared to the insight that you get when you go through that journey. And so, because I believe that information is power and it helps us make better decisions, I actually went to Google and possibly read through everything that I could find. And I think it was a pretty bad idea to do that, because my initial checkup happened on Monday, and by Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, my husband Abhi and I, we were swamped with so much information. It was hard to process. And at least 8 years ago, there weren't even one success story that we came through. And so it was all this dismal, dreary information. And it just blew our minds off. I mean, it was really, really hard. And so Thursday evening, we shut off everything and we said, we'll wait for Monday. And we decided that until Monday comes, it was 3 days away, we would have a time of our life. So we went out, we had a good time, we spent time with some friends, we spent time with each other, and really got ready for Monday. Yes, we did our research, we got ready with the questions that we wanted to ask the doctors. But yes, if you're expecting a diagnosis, please, Google is not the first place that you should go to, because the amount of information is going to overwhelm you. And unfortunately, still, you may not find what you really want to hear. And that can be that can really pull you down.
Yeah, and I mean, Google is so easily accessible. It's like it's our default response now. Like anything I want to know, it's like, okay, let me find out on Google. And so I think that's really good advice. That I think to pace yourself and
Yeah.
I guess managing that information flow, especially when you are in this, I guess, very vulnerable emotional space. So
Yes.
it sounds like so you went through this, you were on Google, and then you went back. They confirmed that diagnosis, and it was. I think one of the key themes has been how rapidly treatment needs to start right
Yes.
after receiving that diagnosis, which I think is
Yes.
really what makes a difference, right? So
Yeah.
it becomes a life and death decision where that pretty much puts everything,
Yeah.
stops everything in its tracks. So how did you get from this space of like overwhelm, okay, we are going out and celebrating and having the time of our lives, to the opening statement, which is, when I make it through this, this is the promise that I'm making to myself. How did that come about for you?
Okay. So this decision that we are going to chill out and stop reading on Google was Thursday evening. Following Monday morning, I get my diagnosis, and life goes through a roller coaster right away, because I was diagnosed at a point wherein I couldn't really delay going into the treatment. Because if, say, my diagnosis was delayed by 4 to 6 weeks, then it would have been very hard for my doctors to help me out. And so there was this urgency of going into the treatment ASAP. And from the day of diagnosis until my first line of treatment, which was getting me ready for chemo, on the 10th day, I was in the hospital. So, all that work, whatever we had to understand, whatever decisions we had to make, whatever several multiple appointments we had to make with different specialists and understand what they were saying, processing all that information, sorting out the insurance, speaking to people at work, all of that had to be done within 10 calendar days. I'm talking about calendar days. And when I had the first chemo treatment, I first had chemo, then I had surgery, radiation therapy. And in parallel, I also had a lot of hormonal treatment, because I was one of the younger patients at 34. When I had my first chemo, I had extremely severe side effects. When you pick up your prescription and the medicines are dispensed in those boxes, there is a tiny leaflet that is inside it,
Yeah.
and it has a huge list of side effects, and you look through it and think, oh, most of those would never happen. Not to us. I had almost every side effect that was listed on that tiny leaflet through all the medication I went through. So my journey through cancer treatment was very aggressive physically. And that's how the entire chemo was, surgery as well. But I did make it to the other side of cancer in the sense that I did get that no evidence of disease, the goal that we work towards in the world of cancer. And because the journey had been so aggressive and I have had such a hard time and living in that uncertainty for about 6.5, 7 months, I had this new appreciation for life. And I just wanted to live differently then. Because in the short span of 6 months, 7 months, my life had changed completely. How I looked, that had changed. What I could do with my body, that had changed. By the time I finished chemo and surgery, I was so poorly that I could do very, very little. So my physical capability had changed. I changed mentally, I changed emotionally. My relationships had changed. My financial situation I could see was becoming a big joke because I was so poorly. I would need time off work to get better. And I started asking myself all these big questions, spiritual questions that I hadn't asked until I was diagnosed with cancer. So you see, I became somebody I didn't know I was before. And so every time I stood in front of a mirror, I just didn't recognize this new person I had become. And because all these changes happened to me so quickly, just in 6, 7 months, they knocked off my confidence completely. And it was a very, very hard time for me. Just just when I came out the other side of cancer, it was one of the hardest times that I went through during my cancer treatment. I was very grateful, but still it felt so hard. So this entire journey that is all about changing my life after cancer, well, it didn't happen overnight. That's what I'm trying to share with anybody who will be watching this recording, because it doesn't happen overnight. It is a messy journey. It takes work. It took a lot of support and a lot of persistence, a lot of resilience, but I got there. And that's a key message I want to share with you. It may not happen overnight. It will not be easy, but it'll be worth it.
I think that's maybe something that, not having gone through this experience, we don't really, I think, realize just the difference. Like, because you seem to be talking a lot about identity and how, like, that sense of identity
Yeah,
shifts, right? The things that we kind of anchor ourselves to, like you wake
yeah.
up in the mirror and you know what you look like, and all those different things. And when that changes, I imagine that can completely knock you off. So thank you for sharing, and just going how you went through that process and finding yourself on the other side. And yeah, very grateful that you are here to continue sharing that story with us.
Thank you.
So would you say that was the biggest challenge for you? Like, what was your biggest challenge going through this process?
So I would say there are a couple of things I want to share when I talk about my challenges. One was obviously going through the whole uncertainty and the physical struggle, because the treatment itself was very aggressive. But a lot of people understand cancer only in terms of fear of mortality or chemo and what it can do to our bodies. And obviously that is important, because if somebody doesn't make it, if somebody doesn't survive cancer, then everything just kind of stops there for them. That was definitely one of the hardships. But I would say, at an individual level, what even felt harder in the moment was rebuilding my life up. Because you pointed it out correctly. I had built certain identities for myself, acquired certain identities for myself over 34 years. And then one by one, each one of them was being stripped away. And yes, I was grateful. Don't get me wrong. I was immensely grateful. I knew, and I still know that not everybody who's touched by cancer really makes it out alive. No pun intended there. But it was still hard. I was letting go of the person. I had to let go of the person I was. I had to let go of the life that I lived before. And there was a grieving process. And it was hard because it was also a very confusing time. I was immensely grateful, and yet life felt so hard. I had thought that I would be jubilant when I listened to that no evidence of disease statement from my doctor, and yet learning to walk again felt so hard in the moment. And and yes, so I would say that that was one of the most difficult times in my life.
What did you learn about yourself because of your journey? So you mentioned like you made a lot of changes from, in your own words, living a normal life
Yeah.
to now living, I guess, a very different life than maybe you had initially planned or imagined. So I'm wondering, what did you learn about yourself because of that journey, and maybe some of the strengths that you discovered? What was that like?
So this cancer journey has been one heck of a journey, I would say. There is a very clear pre-cancer and post-cancer in my life, because when I survived cancer, I made some very conscious decisions to change my life. So how I would like to put it is, cancer was not a bump in the road for me. Cancer was a fork in the road for me. It didn't have to, but I made that decision to change my life completely. Things like, I said, I'm going to come off that autopilot and start living more consciously. I'm going to change my work and only focus on the work that brings me joy and meaning. And so I qualified as a coach, set myself up as a coach. And one of the things that I learned about myself was how passionate I was about helping people being seen and heard. So the whole journey of cancer really clarified for me what my own values were and what was important for me. So, Laura, in my post cancer life, when I decided that I would set myself up as a coach, the question was, what the hell am I going to focus on? Because there can be a zillion things you can do as a coach. And that's when I looked back at my whole life and zeroed in on what was important to me and what was aligned with my values. And this is one of the big things that I learned about myself. I grew up in India, which has a highly patriarchal culture. And even though I was a girl who had access to every opportunity, there were no opportunities that were denied to me just because of how the culture was. Because of being a girl, I always had to do more. I always had to be more to be seen and heard. And it felt hard. I also thought about the time when I came out the other side of cancer, and I was grateful. And yet I felt so rubbish because I had lost each of those identities and I didn't know who I had become. And my confidence went down because I didn't resonate with the person I had become. And I went into hiding because that's what somebody with very little confidence does, right? And in that moment, I had stopped seeing and hearing myself. And because I had stopped seeing and hearing myself, it felt like one of the hardest moments, one of the hardest phases in my life. Because because when I went into hiding, not only I stopped seeing and hearing myself, I did not even allow anyone else to see and hear me. And it was a very hard place to be in. And so when I decided that I would work as a coach, the question was, what do I focus on? And I said, I am so passionate about helping people. This whole thing about being seen and heard is really important. And this is what my passion is going to be. I'm going to focus on helping people being seen and heard, and I'm going to do it through their stories. So this was one thing that I really clarified, and there was more to it, why I decided on it, but I would say helping people being seen and heard was one of my key values, and I didn't have that kind of clarity before cancer. And that's what my mission is, because I stand against the idea that people should go through the motions of life without being seen and heard. So that was one thing I found about myself. I also learned that when I was growing up, there were lots of stories I had acquired from the world I grew up in, through my social and cultural conditioning and through my own life experiences. And when I went through cancer, I had the opportunity to literally peel off all those stories one by one, and unbecome those stories and replace them with new stories that helped me live that life, create that life, meaningful and joyful life that I wanted. And I would say this process wasn't easy. It wasn't as rosy as it sounds. No, no, no. It was pretty messy. And I'm grateful that I had access to a lot of support. I had access to help, the non-clinical support. So my doctors and the healthcare team did a fantastic job in helping me come out the other side of cancer, and I'm immensely grateful for that. But I also had a lot of non-clinical support in terms of therapies, physical therapies, counseling, and then coaching. And these are the guys who really helped me rebuild my life. And this process required an awful lot of resilience and perseverance. So I understood I'm not a quitter. And I really developed. I knew I was resilient, but then I had not faced anything so big until then. So that was something else I discovered about myself.
I love that. Yeah, discovering that you're not a quitter. And I think when you find yourselves in those, like no pun intended, do or die moments, just being able to find yourself and get to the other side of that. I
Yeah,
think that that's incredible. And like you said, rebuilding and not glossing over the messiness of
yeah,
that process and understanding that it's okay to not be okay. I think
yeah,
that's a very important thing to for us to remember. I think especially as you said, when we've grown up with in very performance oriented cultures where it's for me, I can kind of resonate with that background where I had opportunities and I had all of that, but there's that sense of I need to keep pushing harder. And so
mhm,
coming to that place where you strip all of that away, yeah, I imagine would not be easy at all. And then relearning to reinvent and choose, like you said, the stories that you choose to be. So what? I mean, I can probably infer some of the things. So you've talked about the sense of clarity, the sense of purpose that's come with that, the sense of just inner strength that seems to have come through that. Those seem to be some of the gifts that have kind of come along the way for you. So I'm wondering, like, what else do you think has empowered you, or maybe that you'd like to add to this, and maybe just talk a little bit about happiness and I guess in your life before and after, and what that shift has been.
so I would say happiness is a little tricky to understand in the concept of cancer, because until cancer happened, life was good and I was happy. I didn't have everything in life, but I would say, generally a happy person. When cancer happened, the next few months were very hard. And I would say, well, because of the cancer treatment, which was so aggressive, the next few years were very hard, to be very honest. But even though there was a lot of difficulty physically and emotionally and building myself back up, there was a larger appreciation, a much deeper appreciation for life, and and really just being alive. That was huge. And so I would say that yes, there were moments when I felt rubbish because it felt so hard, but by and large, it was also a time. It has been a time wherein I have had this newfound appreciation for life and what I have, my family, their support, access to some of the best facilities that there are in the world. Really, a lot of gratitude. But it doesn't mean that it's not hard. And now that I would say my life has, I've I've rebuilt that life. I would say I've set up my coaching practice properly. I am well now, and life seems to be getting back to normal. I would say, obviously, that happiness quotient has shot up manifold.
It sounds like there's been I think just in the consciousness of you mentioned like rebuilding your life.
Yeah,
It's almost like you're no longer living the life that, in a sense, you were given, but it's
yeah,
almost like the life that you've now chosen to live,
yes.
with that fork in the path along the way for you. Could you talk a little bit about, because I'm hearing you mention like family and community and the support. What was that like for your family, and how did they how did all of you kind of navigate, right? Because you're in the middle of going through this treatment, and they are there alongside you going through this experience with you. So I'm wondering, what was that like for them, even in terms of maybe some of the changes, and I think it's also when we change, it also changes the people around us. So
Yeah.
what would some of those things be?
So I would say my cancer experience changed not only me, but like you said, my immediate family as well. Cancer, the news of cancer diagnosis was a shock to my family and to me because we have never had cancer in my family. And I didn't have any of the typical risk factors that are associated with incidence of cancer. So things like alcohol, smoking, eating red meat, lack of exercise, stress. I didn't have any of those. And I was also one of the younger people. I was only 34 when I was diagnosed. So that age related thing with cancer, that risk was also not there. So when I got diagnosed, it was obviously a shock to everybody. And and everything just went into a turmoil because I was rushed into the treatment and there were all these decisions we had to make. But I would say that my family coped really well. In the UK, it's only my husband and I, and my brothers and their families live in the US, and my parents live in India. And after a few weeks, my mom came over and she became my primary carer. So she looked after me because as the treatment progressed, I became more and more poorly because the fatigue and the side effects, the impact of the treatment builds up cumulatively in cancer. But because she was at home, there was always somebody to look after me. And my husband, he has been my rock right from day one, right from the day we were given a heads up for cancer. It hasn't been easy for them, especially. This is something I want to say to everybody, that of carers the role of carers is far bigger than they are given credit for. When somebody is diagnosed with cancer, all the attention goes on to that person. And there is a good reason for that, because they are the ones who are suffering. They are the ones who are going through all that pain. They are the ones who are at the risk of losing their life. But the carers, their immediate family, go through the same fears. They go through a similar experience. It's not exactly the same, but it's a very hard journey for them because one of their loved ones is going through cancer. And here is the typical example I like to illustrate it with. Somebody who is going through cancer would be scared, what if my life is cut short because of the uncertainty of life? What if I die? What if I lose my life? And their immediate family would be worried about, what if they die and we are left behind? You see, it is still fear of mortality. The fear of dying is different from fear of being left behind, but they are both equally valid and intense fears. And unfortunately, because of the nature of cancer and how consuming the process is, the carers are completely ignored. So, carers, please, please, please look after yourselves. And thank you so much for doing whatever you do for the cancer patients.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. I think, like you said, it's we don't exist in isolation, and I think that's a different perspective as you talk about the fear of when you receive the diagnosis, the
Yeah.
fear that you might go, and yeah, the fear that you might be left behind. I think that's a very powerful distinction to, I think, just really help and to support whoever's going through this at the moment. I thank you so much for, I guess, there's just a sense of like purpose and just encouragement that's coming through, and very I think, very different insights as well, very profound perspectives that you're sharing with us. So I very, very much appreciate you sharing that. So I think as we kind of wrap this up and come to a close, what would you say? What tips would you give on being a strong and happy woman? So just from your experience and having gone through this, what are some of the tips that you'd give to all our she's out there?
Okay. So there is one suggestion I could give to everyone, irrespective of whether they have been touched by cancer or not. And that is, you don't have to go through the journey called life, whether cancer is a part of it or not, all by yourself. There's a lot of support available through friends, through family, through professionals. You don't have to make it harder than it needs to be. In my case, I was able to become this cancer thriver that I am, and now able to help other people because I had that support. My coaches were instrumental in helping me put that life together. And asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It means that you care enough about something and yourself and your life that you are ready to ask for help. It's a sign of courage. So don't do it all alone. There is no additional glory in it. Take help.
Thank you. I think that's definitely something we can all get better at doing, is
Yeah.
asking for help and really not doing life alone. And I think that's why I think having community, connecting with like-minded women, hearing these kinds of stories reminds us that we are not alone, and that, yeah, there are other people out there that we can reach out to and go through life with together. So thank you so much, Parul, for sharing your story, your journey, and inspiring and encouraging us. I think regardless of whatever age we're at, like you said, it's age is one of the risk factors, but that doesn't mean if you don't have any of the risk factors that you might not end up with such a diagnosis. So really, both being conscious of your health and also making sure that you are seeing your doctors, making sure you're doing those regular health checkups and taking care of yourself, because early detection really does make an incredible difference.
Yeah.
Early detection does save lives. So with that, so She Network, part of our campaign for Breast Cancer Awareness Month is raising funds for Breast Cancer Foundation. So if you head over to our link, giving.sg/campaigns/She Network BCF, you can donate on the website, and your donations go directly to BCF. BCF is committed to raising awareness about breast cancer through talks, events, and publications that advocate early detection through regular screening, as well as supporting breast cancer survivors and their families through various befriending and training activities. So your giving does make a difference, and please do donate, please do give, and we'd love to partner with you to make a difference towards that. So Parul, I know you have written a book. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yes. So I wrote a book about my cancer experience, and I have a copy here actually. It's called My Cancer Journey, A Rendezvous with Myself, because my cancer journey was exactly that. My cancer journey was a journey to come home to myself, and it really helped me meet the real person, the real me that I am, the person who had been hidden under all those layers and all those acquired stories. But there is a very specific reason, well, actually, three, why I wrote this book. One is to build awareness about cancer, because I truly believe that in the world of cancer, an early diagnosis can make a huge difference. It can be the deciding factor between whether somebody would survive cancer or not. I know in my case, if my diagnosis had been delayed by another 4 weeks or 6 weeks, I would probably not be here having this conversation with you. So, building awareness about cancer was one of the reasons. The second reason was I wanted to inspire people through my story, and that includes people who are going through cancer, people who are living beyond cancer, and their families, because, hey, it's a hard journey for everyone and it's not a short journey. Cancer is a long term condition, and a lot of impact that cancer causes is long term, yes. And life literally changes after that for everybody. And when cancer is going on, the uncertainty is hard, and there are plenty of days where the hope is very little. And I'm hoping that through my story, well, who knows, somebody who needs to hear what I have to say, that might be the only flicker of hope that they might be able to hold on to. So helping people through inspiration and a story of survival. And the third reason is, I grew up in India, and India is one of those countries, and it's not just India. It is, this statement is true for many other places in the world. There is a lot of judgment and stigma and shame associated with the word cancer. And so, even though I lived for 32 years in my life, 32 years of my life in India, I had never interacted with a cancer patient. Not because cancer doesn't happen there, but because when cancer happens, people don't talk about it. And we have never had cancer in my family. So there was no opportunity for me to have an insight into what it really means to have cancer. And through my story, I wanted to challenge that stigma. I wanted to challenge that, let's be silent about it. I wanted to share my story out in the open, so that that shame, that taboo, that whole judgment thing could be normalized and could be done away with. Because the more number of people talk about it, the more normal it would become. So, building awareness, helping and inspiring people, and challenging that stigma. Those were three very clear reasons for me to that prompted me to publish my cancer journey, a rendezvous with myself.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think that's so powerful, and I think in finding even people to have these conversations with, that was actually one of the realizations that we came to. So Joy and myself, as we were reaching out and looking for people to interview and talk to about breast cancer, we realized that there is still very much this stigma and that sense of taboo around discussing it. And so I think you're highlighting it, that it's not just in certain places in the world like India. It is, I think it is actually quite a widespread phenomenon.
Yeah,
So
it's a
thank you so
widespread
much
phenomenon.
for writing the book and for being here and sharing your story. Yeah, feeling very inspired. And so if you are going through this or you know someone who is, please do get Parul's book, and I can probably put the link in the description for this video. Thank you so much, Parul. And yeah, wishing you all the best.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
and
Laura.
I think we will end with our Wonder Woman pose.
Ooh. So, shall we do
Yeah, so
it?
this is our,
Yes.
yes, let's do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me.